Hello and welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoy this story. I'm going to try and upload a new story each day. The Forgotten Graveyard. It was a crisp autumn evening on the Isle of Wight. Holly Arnold and her friends, Amy, Tom, and Jack, had ventured out for a hike through the rolling hills and dense forests that bordered the island's old towns. The fading night cast long, eerie shadows as they followed a trail that none of them had ever explored before. Holly, the de facto leader of the group, had suggested it after hearing a rumor about a forgotten graveyard hidden somewhere deep in the woods. The stories they heard in pubs were vague, tales of curses and whispered warnings, but nothing had ever come of it. To them, it was just a bit of local folklore, nothing more than a challenge. "We'll be back before dark," Holly had assured them with a confident smile, though there was a spark of excitement in her eyes that suggested she wouldn't mind if they stayed out a little longer. Holly loved the thrill of the unknown. As they walked, the atmosphere grew more oppressive. The wind, which had been gentle when they first set out, began to pick up, rustling the branches of ancient oak trees that loomed over them. The path became less defined, winding deeper into the untamed part of the island where few dared to tread. The air was cool, but Holly could feel a strange heaviness settling over them. The others seemed to feel it too, growing quieter as they trudged through the underbrush. "Are we sure we're going the right way?" Amy asked, her voice tinged with unease. She was the most skeptical of the group, always the first to call for caution. "Yeah, I think we just follow this path a bit longer," Holly said, though her confidence was starting to waver. She checked the map on her phone, but it had no details of this area. It was like the forest had swallowed them whole, hidden them from the rest of the world. Suddenly, Jack, who was lagging behind, stopped dead in his tracks. "Guys," he called out, his voice strained. "Look at this." The others turned to see what had caught his attention. Just off the path, half concealed by thick moss and overgrown vines, was a wrought iron gate. It was old, rusted, and barely hanging on to its hinges. Behind it lay what appeared to be a forgotten graveyard, the headstones crooked and withered by time. "Is this it?" Tom asked, excitement creeping into his voice. The graveyard. Holly moved closer to the gate, her heart pounding. She had hoped they'd find it, but now that they were here, something felt wrong. The air seemed colder near the graveyard, and a thick mist clung to the ground, swelling between the graves like a ghostly veil. "We should go back," Amy said, her voice shaking. "This place feels off." "Nonsense," Holly replied, though she couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "We came all this way. Let's at least take a look around." Reluctantly, the group pushed open the gate, its rusted hinges squealing in protest. The graveyard was larger than they had expected, stretching further into the fog than they could see. The gravestones were arranged haphazardly, some leaning at odd angles, others almost completely submerged by the earth. Holly felt an overwhelming sense of dread settle over her, but she pushed it aside. "Check out the dates," Tom said, pointing at one of the headstones. "Some of these are from the 1800s. They moved deeper into the graveyard, studying the inscriptions on the tombstones. Holly knelt by one particularly old grave, brushing away the dirt and moss that obscured the writing. As the letters became clear, her breath caught in her throat. "Holly Arnold, born September 12, 1997, died October 15, 2024. She froze. "What the hell?" she whispered, her pulse pounding in her ears. The others gathered around her, their faces going pale as they read the inscription. "Holly, that's your name," Jack said, his voice cracking. "It has to be some kind of sick joke," she muttered, standing up abruptly. "It has to be." Before anyone could respond, Tom gasped. He had wandered to another grave, and as he wiped away the dirt, he saw his own name staring back at him. "Tom Davies, born March 3, 1996, died October 16, 2024. This isn't real," Tom stammered, backing away. Jack and Amy ran to the nearest headstones, each finding their own names etched in cold, unforgiving stone. The dates of death were mere days away, marking their fates as if they had already been sealed. "What the hell is going on?" Amy screamed, her voice breaking as panic overtook her. "Who would do this? How could they know? Someone's messing with us," Jack said, though he didn't sound convinced. "We need to leave now." But as they turned to go, the mist thickened, swirling around them like a living thing. The gate, which had been creaking open when they entered, now stood firmly shut, its iron bars moving despite their frantic efforts to push it open. "We're trapped," Tom yelled, panic rising in his throat. He began to kick at the gate, but it didn't budge. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to tremble, and a deep, guttural groan echoed through the graveyard. Holly turned to see the earth shifting, the dirt moving as though something was trying to claw its way up from below. "Oh no," Holly whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. "We need to get out of here," but before they could act, the first skeletal hand broke through the soil. A decayed corpse, its rotting flesh clinging to its bones, pulled itself from the grave. Then another. And another. Soon the graveyard was teeming with the dead, their hollow eyes glowing with a cold, malevolent light. "One!" Holly screamed, but there was nowhere to go. The mist had closed in on them, thick and impenetrable, trapping them in the graveyard with the rising dead. The corpses moved slowly at first, shambling toward them, their jaws creaking open in grotesque grins. But as the group backed away, they realized the dead were not aimless. They were drawn to something, drawn to them. Holly tried to fight. She grabbed a broken branch and swung at the nearest corpse, but her blows barely slowed it down. They were surrounded, and with every passing moment, more of the dead clawed their way out of the earth. The friends fought desperately, but one by one, they were overwhelmed. Jack was the first to fall, his screams silenced as the dead pulled him into the cold, damp earth. Amy and Tom followed soon after, their bodies dragged into open graves that closed behind them as if the earth itself was devouring them. Holly was the last. She ran, her breath ragged, her heart pounding in her ears, but the mist seemed to close in around her, leading her back to where her own grave waited. She tripped, falling to her knees in front of the tombstone that bore her name. The earth beneath her began to shift, opening up like a mouth ready to swallow her whole. Holly screamed, but no one heard her. The grave claimed her, and in the silent, forgotten graveyard, the tombstones stood once more, waiting for the next unlucky souls to stumble upon them. Holly's world was swallowed by darkness as the cold earth closed in around her. She could feel the weight of the soil pressing down, suffocating her, and yet she wasn't dead. Not yet. For what felt like hours, or perhaps days, Holly lay entombed, her body immobilized by the crushing dirt, her mind teetering on the edge of panic and despair. Time lost meaning. The sounds of the living world above faded until there was nothing but silence and eerie, oppressive quiet that gnawed at her sanity. But then, slowly, the silence gave way to something else. A distant whisper. Faint at first, like the rustling of leaves in a far-off breeze, but growing steadily louder, more insistent. It wasn't a voice she recognized, but it called to her, beckoning her to awaken. Holly opened her eyes, though there was no light. Only the sensation of movement, a slow, deliberate shifting of the earth around her, as though the grave itself was guiding her back to the surface. She clawed her way upward, her fingers bleeding and raw as they scraped against roots and rocks. Every muscle in her body screamed in pain, but the whispers urged her on, promising an end to the torment if only she could reach the surface. Finally, with one last desperate effort, her hand broke through the soil. She gasped as cool air hit her face. Holly dragged herself up from the grave, her body covered in mud and blood, her breath ragged. She collapsed on the ground beside her own tombstone, coughing and shivering. But something was different. The graveyard was still there, shrouded in mist, but it felt wrong. The mist wasn't swirling like before, instead, it hung in the air, unnaturally still, as if frozen in time. The tombstones loomed around her, silent and watchful, but there was no sign of the others, no sign of Jack, Amy, or Tom. Their graves, which had swallowed them whole, were undisturbed, as if nothing had ever happened. Holly stumbled to her feet, her heart pounding. She called out, her voice cracking in the empty graveyard. "Jack, Amy, Tom," no answer. Just the whispers. Louder now and closer. She spun around, looking for the source of the sound, but there was no one there. Only the graves. Only the dead. Panicking, Holly turned to flee, but the mist closed in, thickening once more, cutting off any path of escape. She tried to run, but the ground beneath her feet shifted, pulling her back toward the graves. It was as if the very land was conspiring to keep her there, to hold her prisoner in this place of death. And then she saw it. At the far end of the graveyard, standing just beyond the reach of the mist, was a figure. Tall and cloaked in shadows, its face obscured by the dark hood it wore. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, as the figure began to move toward her. Its steps were slow, deliberate, and with each one Holly felt the air grow colder. "Who are you?" Holly demanded, her voice trembling. "What do you want?" The figure stopped a few paces away from her, its presence overwhelming. It didn't speak, but Holly felt the answer in her bones, as if the knowledge had always been there, waiting for her to understand. This place wasn't just a graveyard. It was a threshold, a liminal space between life and death, where the boundaries of time and reality twisted and bent. The dead buried here had not passed peacefully. They were trapped, bound to this forgotten place by some ancient curse or force beyond human comprehension. And now, so was she. "No," Holly whispered, shaking her head. "This can't be real." The figure raised a hand, pointing toward her. And as it did, the ground beneath Holly's feet began to split open again, the earth hungry to reclaim what it had once consumed. She stumbled back, desperate to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The whispers grew louder still, a cacophony of voices, all calling her name, pulling her toward the open grave that had once been hers. The cold grip of death was tightening around her, pulling her back into the earth where she belonged. But just as the ground seemed ready to swallow her whole, the figure spoke. Its voice was like the rustle of dead leaves, dry and brittle, but unmistakably commanding. "You were chosen." Holly froze, her heart pounding. "Chosen for what? To take their place," the figure replied. "The others are gone. You remain. You will watch over this place. You will keep the balance." Holly's mind raced. The others, Jack, Amy, Tom, they were gone. She had somehow survived. But now the terrible truth was sinking in. This graveyard had no guardian. No one to tend to the restless dead, to keep them from rising again. It had chosen her, the last of the living, to stay. "Ah!" Holly screamed, backing away. "I would stay here, I won't," but the figure's outstretched hand never wavered. The whispers grew softer, more soothing now, as if lulling her into acceptance. "You will stay, Holly Arnold, and in time you will forget, as all the others have forgotten before you." Before she could protest again, the mist enveloped her completely, dragging her back to the open grave. Holly fought, clawed at the ground, but it was futile. The cold earth claimed her once more, pulling her down into the dark. As the soil closed in around her, the whispers finally faded into silence, leaving only the heavy, oppressive quiet of the graveyard. And then all was still. Years passed. The Isle of Wight remained a quiet, sleepy place, its legends and ghost stories fading into the background of everyday life. Few remembered the tale of the forgotten graveyard, and few still ventured into the woods where it lay hidden. But those who did, those unlucky enough to stumble upon it, would find the graves waiting for them. The tombstones, weathered and ancient, bore names they recognized. Names that seemed to have been waiting for them. And standing among the graves, watching in silence, was a woman. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, as if lost in a dream she could never wake from. Her name was Holly Arnold, and she had forgotten everything. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this story. Please don't forget to like, and even better, like and subscribe. Thank you very much, and I hope you have had or have a great day.